So Paul wrote in Ephesians 2, verses 20 through 22, that the church, the household of God, has been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom the whole building, being joined together, grows like a biological, organic thing into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you also are being built together for a dwelling place of God in the Spirit. And that was what God's intention was from the very beginning, was not to build buildings made with hands, but to build a building of souls not made with hands, that would worship him in spirit and in truth. Verse 16, going back to 2 Peter 1:16, for we did not follow cunningly devised fables when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but were eyewitnesses of his majesty. The word cunningly devised, to invent or to devise cleverly or cunningly, which gives the idea of a person who purposely and knowingly makes up a false story in order to deceive. Now, there are some people that do this with the intention of ultimately, in their own minds, doing something good, but they're saying, well, I have to deceive you to make you feel better. So there are many different people that will contrive something or even lie to you in order to, in their own mind, justify this because it's for your benefit. So I can motivate you to do something. So I can motivate you. It's just like the way even parents do that with kids. They tell fibs to make their children do things that are maybe good for them, but ultimately it all falls apart because of the fact that we're not to lie. We're to be children of truth, children of the light. There shouldn't be any deception in the things that we do and say. A fable is a story, a falsehood, translated from the Greek word mythos, where we get our word myth. So Peter knew that the stories of the power and the coming of Christ, the stories that he would relate to people that had not walked with Jesus or seen the miracles of Jesus, they had never been with him when he walked upon the water or stilled the wind and the sea. They hadn't been with him when he took 2 fish and 5 loaves, fed thousands of people. They weren't with him when he laid hands on the sick or even spoke a word and had people healed from a distance. They hadn't seen these things, nor could they even understand that someone who had been crucified had actually risen from the dead, ascended into heaven, and now was coming back. This all sounds much like mythology. Sounds like fables to someone who doesn't go beyond the realm of the 5 senses. It doesn't allow him or herself to see beyond medicine or physics or science. And so when we tell people of the things that happen, just like the thing with the 67 years, or it being actually 6-7, or when you try to relate how you prayed for someone that maybe had full-blown AIDS and you saw them a week later and they didn't have sores, people are going to think you're deceitful, that you're the liar. But our God can do anything, and he does whatever that he desires to do. And when Peter and the other apostles and John would tell people about the things that they had witnessed, then people would go, well, I don't know. Should I believe you? Because the Romans and the Greeks, they talk about their gods and about things that they may have seen because they're exaggerated. So he knew that the stories of the power and coming of Christ could easily sound like so many Greek and Roman myths, and surely it must be an exaggeration of the truth. Because there are countless people today who look at the stories in the Bible as fables or myth because they are so supernatural and miraculous in scope. And the coming of Christ, that event which is still to come, where every eye will see him and he comes in judgment, is something that people can't even fathom. That's why people would rather choose not to believe it and think, well, that's not really going to happen. It's going to be more, the second coming of Christ is an awakening of Christ consciousness in the people. Or it's going to be where people join the Aquarian age, and we all start to live in peace and love, which is what Jesus was all about, isn't it? He spoke about love, said that God is love, and that's what it's all about, and that's what we're going to do. Love, 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 love. But yet not one transformed life in the life of someone apart from Christ. But when you see a life that has been transformed by Christ, it is a miracle. I could tell you things about people in your congregation that would scare you, especially about myself. Transformation, power that comes into a life and changes us from within. that isn't based on emotion or human understanding or being brainwashed or convinced by some high-powered salesperson in the name of Jesus. It is where the Spirit of God himself comes and confronts you, and you allow that confrontation to lead to his coming into your life. And then you become a whole different person, and you tell people the way that you were, and they don't believe you. They go, I can't imagine you being that person. I don't see any of that in you. And you go, that's what I'm telling you. God is real. God is real, and I'm part of the proof of that reality. In Mark 13, 26 and 27, Jesus said, then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory, and then he will send his angels and gather together his elect from the four winds, from the farthest part of the earth to the farthest part of heaven. He went on to say in Mark 13, 31 through 33, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Take heed, watch and pray, for you do not know when the time is. So the miraculous power demonstrated by Jesus and the promise he made to come again in judgment could sound like exaggerated stories. Religions of the world are mostly built upon myth. The gods and characters of their belief systems may have been rooted in a true story or a true person at one time, but become greatly exaggerated throughout each decade, century, or millennium. You could take one character that may have been a real person, perhaps like Siddhartha, Buddha, who was Indian. He was a Brahmin who came up with his own way of thinking because he was disillusioned with Brahmanism and the Samana and all these other people where he studied, and he was disillusioned with all of it and came up with his own way of belief, and people put him up on a pedestal, and then pretty soon they're praying to him, lighting incense in front of him, chanting in front of him. And I think that if Buddha were alive today, he'd go, that's exactly what I didn't want you to do. I didn't want you to worship me. I'm not God. I'm just a man with a philosophy. I saw something that really caused me to have peace, and I talked about it. Now you worship me, and that's what people do. But the Bible is a book of history. It has no perfect heroes apart from the person of Jesus Christ, which was mind-blowing to me. When you read a book about a deity, even if it's something made up, that person is always larger than life and full of goodness and can do no wrong. And you read the story of Israel and the promises given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and how sneaky and cunning these men were. And so many people inside the Bible were corrupt and fell to sin even when they started out really righteous, like King David. David was a man after God's own heart and continued to be a man after God's own heart, but had a big, giant gap in there where he allowed darkness to come into his life, and because of it, he was stained forever because of that, but yet he still was a man after God's own heart. We look at all these people inside the Bible and you go, the reason why we know that God is real is because he took ordinary people with ordinary humanity and problems and ambition and sin and shame and still made them holy. Jesus was the only perfect man. The foundation of Christianity is built upon first-hand testimonies from people who walked with Jesus, the apostles. There were prophets, disciples, even non-believers would testify to the historic events that took place that we see in the Bible. The majority of Jews, the Romans, historians are witness to what occurred 2,000 years ago, and the testimonies and stories can be corroborated to reveal the truth. There was left behind substantial evidence inside the letters and the writings and the testimonies of a multitude of people that all bear witness to the same thing. If you go into a court of law, if you have enough witnesses, and you come before a jury, they decide your innocence or guilt based on the testimony of the witnesses and the circumstances. If you were to look into the scriptures and put these things to the test, you'll always find that they're true. More true than science, more true than things that people have thought for centuries. So Peter states to the readers of his letter, we did not follow cunningly devised fables. We didn't hear about Christ through a second or third-hand source, like a master storyteller. We did not base our witness on anything less than our eyewitness experiences of his, Christ's majesty. This word majesty is really something that is much more than just a description of royalty. It speaks about his power, his wisdom, his love, his insights. And in this example, they actually saw him beyond his mortal shell, as we're going to see in the next couple of verses. It says, "For he received from God the Father honor and glory when such a voice came to him from the excellent glory, 'This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased.' And we heard this voice, which came from heaven when we were with him on the holy mountain." This shows us that Peter, even being older now, this was the primary great event in his life. He had seen Jesus do all the other things. He was with Jesus when he fed the multitudes. He saw Jesus walk upon the water. He walked upon the water himself for a time. He saw everything that Jesus did. He heard everything that Jesus said. But what stands out in his mind is when Peter, James, and John were up on the mount with him, and Jesus allowed them to see part of his glory. And the reason why I say part of his glory is because if he had revealed his full glory, they would have gone mad or crazy or blind or all of the above. Can't see God and live, the glory of God. And I can just imagine just for a moment what it was like with Jesus, meek and mild, with his robe and long hair and beard, and all of a sudden he just doesn't hold back at all. He allows what is within him, which was the total embodiment of the deity, the total fullness of God dwelt in him bodily, and rather than restrict it with his flesh, with his clothing, it just started to penetrate through every single fiber of his skin and his organs and everything, just bursting forth in this light. Just what a scene that must have been. Glorious and fearful and all of the above. You know, we think, oh, I'd love to see that. No, you wouldn't at the same time. When I met the Lord, he showed me himself to a certain degree. And I tried to bury my face in the sand. I spun around and I tried to push my head into the desert out in Joshua Tree. If you've ever been out to Joshua Tree, a lot of it's really sandy. There's a lot of rocks in there too. I'm pushing my face into the sand, trying to get away from what I'm looking at. That's how terrifying it was. Even if I had been a believer at that particular time, I think I still would have been fearful. Because it's just so magnificent. It's just so glorifying. It's just so light. And there's so much, the presence of God was in every single molecule in the air. And when he spoke, it filled every single molecule of space all around me. I could hear his voice everywhere at the same time. And I was scared to death, but greatly comforted at the same time. That's how I became a Christian. He had to do something really radical to me to show me that he was real. Because I would just not believe. I had always had a reason to not receive him.